over there some empty seats. So welcome, and thank you for coming this evening. My name is Tanya Graham, and for those of you who I have not yet met, I am the Mayor of Ashland. It is an important evening for the neighborhood and the council, and all of the councilors want to hear what you want to tell us about what is already happening in the neighborhood, as well as your concerns and other ideas about how we take this project forward in a good way. But unfortunately, because of a mix-up in noticing the neighborhood meeting as a special council meeting, we cannot have a quorum at the council present today. That means we can only have 3 of us participate this evening. Joining me this evening is Councilor Kaplan. There's Councilor Kaplan. Who serves as the council liaison to the Housing and Human Services Advisory Committee, and Councilor Bloom, who will soon join Councilor Kaplan as the second liaison to that committee, and is also being named the liaison to the continuum of care process at the regional level. All of the other councilors set this evening aside tonight, and we're looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have this evening. But we cannot violate public meeting laws, and so they are unable to stay. But I want to thank them for their good work and their dedication to the process, so I have asked them to come just for this opening so that I can thank them for their hard work and they can wish us well in our conversations tonight. So I just want to thank Council Chair Hyatt. If you can get a wave, Council Chair. Councilor Gina Duquesne, Councilor Jeff Dale, and Councilor Eric Hansen. And we all wish you could stay tonight, but thank you for coming. I'd like to share a bit about the flow for the evening. We will start with a presentation from city staff to make sure we are all working with the same information about what the project is and what we're looking at doing going forward, how we've incorporated the feedback that we have already received from the community, and what decisions have yet to be made. Then we will introduce the table themes. You will have noticed the tables here each have a theme, and move to those tables so that you can have conversations with both elected leaders and also city staff who have expertise around the questions that you have. You will notice that we are taking notes this evening, and we are doing that so that we can gather your concerns and ideas and make sure that we can address those and respond to them as we go through the process of making more decisions about this shelter site. And then Joe will talk a little bit more about what those next steps are for the work that comes from tonight. Tonight is really about hearing from the neighborhood, the people who live around the site of the shelter and who are going to be its neighbors. As we've mentioned before, our intention is to be a good neighbor with this site, and so this particular evening is really about hearing from the people in that neighborhood. As we begin our time together tonight, it's important to understand what we are trying to accomplish with this project. We are facing a perfect storm related to homelessness. We are dealing with a decade or better long housing shortage that has been exacerbated by the loss of housing due to wildfire, skyrocketing drug use and overdose issues, and ineffective state-level mental health and addiction services that have come together to create a problem that really lands at the doorstep of local government and of our community. And we are not the only ones who are facing this. Communities across Oregon, across the West, are dealing with this very same thing. We are not unique in this way. We don't control those systems, but the fallout, of course, is ours. And here in Ashland, we are compassionate. But we know we have limits in terms of what we can shoulder ourselves. We want to help those who can and will engage in bettering their lives. And we want a certain level of accountability and reciprocity in terms of that relationship. Being compassionate does not mean that we have to accept or tolerate really bad behavior. And in conversations with people around the neighborhood, I live in this neighborhood, but in conversations that all of the counselors have had in the neighborhood, we know that there are already challenges that are existing before this shelter comes into play. And it's important to us that we acknowledge and address those in this process. of the goal, and certainly this again comes from talking to the neighbors already, is to make sure that through this process we make it so that people can feel safe about having their children use the bike path, use Clay Street Park, and not be afraid of what they might find there, and have a safe, comfortable neighborhood on both sides of that bike path. That's really what we're aiming at. One of the things that I have appreciated in talking with neighbors about this process so far is that there seems to be a general understanding that we need to do something, and no one is quite sure what that is. There is no silver bullet, but this council is committed to working alongside the neighborhood, working alongside our unhoused neighbors to make sure that what we come up with here works all across the full spectrum. So equally important to the services that we will offer our unhoused neighbors is the impact that it has on the neighborhood. And that's why we're doing this. That's why many of you received a knock on the door from a counselor, because in order for this to work, we need to know what you're experiencing so that we can address it and move on. Joe is going to come up next, our city manager, and offer the presentation so that we all know what is happening at that shelter site and where we're at. As he's coming up, I just want to remind everyone that what we are doing on this site is a pilot. We are going to try some things out, and we are going to continue to adapt and adjust them and shift course until we get to the right mix of what those services look like for the larger neighborhood and the community. So now I will turn it over to Joe Lessard, our city manager, for the presentation.
I'm going to bet. I'm going to knock that over before this is over. Good evening and welcome everyone. Thank you, Mayor. Hopefully. I'll try to speak. Oh, that helped, didn't it? I'm going to go through a few slides quickly. I'm not going to read everything to you. I'm just going to hit some of the high points for the presentation. You'll find this on the city website. You can follow up later and have a download copy of it. I want to talk a little bit about where we are, not just Ashland, but why Ashland is part of sort of a national trend. There's the context we all have to understand and how it's trickling down to Ashland. And not just in terms of the issues we are addressing, but also how funding is working. I'm going to walk through that. I'm going to talk about what the city's general approach and plan right now is, or at least how it's matured to this point. And then I'll talk through a little bit of the acquisition of the property that we're talking about, the Ashland Emergency Shelter. So with that, if I can do these buttons correctly, and they tell me it's pretty simple because there's only 2 buttons. First, I want to talk a little bit about sort of the circumstances we find ourselves in. The U.S. Department of Housing anticipates that there are almost 600,000 people homeless in our country at any particular day. 40% are unsheltered. That means that we have 40% of this population that is either camping or living in cars or trying to figure out how to make do somewhere in living in rough. That's a pretty large percentage of our country that is in need stabilization in order for them to find a way out of being homeless. I also want to mention that the life expectancy when you are living this type of life is 42 to 52 years. That without services, without support services, this life takes a toll. There are a number of triggers, and I've only sort of skimmed at a high level what they are. Poverty and circumstances that make people, put people in a position where they aren't able to get housing. They either have a criminal record, they have a physical disability, they may have addiction issues, they can't get housing, so that's why they're unhoused. That's why they're in a lot of circumstances, and the poverty that they live in doesn't give them an option. Traumatic events, we've all heard about this, loss of a job, a change of life, a divorce, a major medical issue, a number of things can create homelessness. can be that last straw that triggers you into a situation where you are suddenly without housing and without support. There are different types of homelessness. There are episodic, there's chronic, there are folks that are hidden, that are living perhaps on couch to couch in homes that we don't really even count because they don't show up in any of the national reports. Oops, there we go. Thank you. It's only 2 buttons and I still can't get it right. There are a number of different conditions, and when you were trying to understand how to address this issue, you need to also tailor what you're doing to target toward the specific niche or issues that these individuals are facing. Nearly 75% of homeless are 25 or older, 80% are children and under. Families are the largest growing portion of our homeless communities, and the vast majority are not dangerous, including those who have mental health issues. They're looking for the same thing that everybody else in our society is looking for: security, a roof, food, support. California is the state that has the highest unhoused population in the country. Oregon is number 4, and we're not that far behind them. Did I skip to the right slide?
Push a button.
Oh, there we go. So we're not that far behind them. If you look at the United States, east of the Mississippi is a dense populated part of the country and the West Coast. And in between are large open expanses of land. There are some major cities there, but it's a large open expanse of land. So we tend to see the concentration to the West Coast because of the quality of living conditions, the climate and so forth, and they don't have the ability to really travel to the other parts of the country. So the 2 parts of the country tend to be separated. I think the other 2, if I remember right, the other 2 states that are ahead of us are New York and Florida. So you can see we have an east-west divide, and Oregon is receiving a great deal of that burden. The state has 18,000 homeless at any given time, and it's seen a 63% increase in the last 5 years. Also, you can see that Medford, Ashland, and Jackson County has received a 132% increase. We are not immune with what's happening in the country. And I think what we're seeing is that our proximity to California is probably an indication of why that number is high. The Governor of Oregon declared an emergency for homelessness to deal with it at the last legislative session. The state came up with over $11 million worth of funding and have issued a series of grants to local jurisdictions so that they can tailor their programs for homelessness to their specific needs in their community. The emergency declaration is effective January 10th of this year until January 10th of next year, 2024. The goals are to prevent over 8,000, almost 9,000 homeless individuals from transitioning to homelessness, adding 600 low barrier shelter beds, and rehousing at least 1,200 households that are already experiencing homelessness. In Jackson County, our goals are 1,200 households out from slipping into homelessness, 67 low barrier shelter beds, and rehousing 133 households. Those seem modest, but they're very important transitions for our community to be contemplating. We estimate in Ashland that somewhere between 80 to 125 individuals are homeless. Now, this slide is probably what I consider one of the more important slides because it walks you through what the city's current efforts are. First, we've established a dusk to dawn sleeping line over by the council chambers. And that area was put in place because the Ninth Circuit Court has identified that if you have individuals who are living in public rights of ways or in parks, that if you wish them to be relocated so that they do not take exclusive use of those properties, those public properties, that you have to find a location for them to sleep. Now, you can lay down and sleep in the parks during the day, but in the evening, our rules in our parks or regulations are that you cannot sleep overnight in our parks or on our public rights of way. So we are providing a location for individuals who need a place to sleep on a nightly basis at that lawn over behind the council chambers. We also are, traditionally have done a severe weather shelter. This is something the city has taken on for quite a while, and we have standards on when we trigger it. It's authorized depending upon weather conditions, severe weather conditions. And it may last a night, it may last several nights, depending upon what our winter season looks like, what our heat looks like, what our smoke looks like, and that, again, that invasion from California smoke that went on now. We also now are looking at an emergency homeless shelter under the governor's declaration. And the state has provided us $1.158 million to fund the acquisition and operation of this emergency homeless shelter during the period that they have declared the emergency. Again, that emergency began on January 10th of this year and expires on January 10th of next year. And the last thing is we also have to have an enforcement understanding. That when there is inappropriate behavior, when someone tries to take exclusive use of public areas, then they need to be directed to one of these other service areas. Now, some cities, if you've been watching around the country, have taken very drastic steps in this regard. I think our police department has been very understanding and has taken a progressive approach to this as best we can, understanding that, again, they are an enforcement branch of the local government. Here's where I knocked this over. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Ashland again. Oops, am I behind? No, I am behind. I'm here. I want to talk about funding. Wave at me, Linda, so that I get my act together. We have received 2 state grants that are paying for the emergency homeless shelter. I mentioned the funding under the governor's emergency declaration, and that's the first item up here, and I can see my columns didn't translate very well when we converted this to PDF. But that's the $1.158 million at the top. We also received from the Administrative Services Department of the state another $1 million grant that we're using. So we have over $2 million to help pay for and operate the shelter, as well as any other homeless programs that we have. The second funding in particular is very flexible. In our general fund, we fund, in our current biennial budget, 2 years of operation of the emergency weather shelter. As I said, we've done this historically, and the council has just this last year adopted an update to those policies that would allow us to trigger the opening of the shelter. The expenditures are that we've spent currently $1.4 million in the cash that we have to acquire the building. We also took out, in order to preserve cash so we could operate and make sure we had the resources to operate the building, the council directed us to do to acquire of the seller that they would carry a note for a period of time at $600,000. And the total actual acquisition, transparent-wise, is $2 million for the building. The seller's note, we have to spend debt service on it, $74,000 over the biennium. And then we have almost $700,000 to operate, to do improvements to the building and the site, to basically try to accommodate the ideas that you might come up with this evening to make the site work and function better for the homeless as well as for the neighborhoods. Also, lastly, we still have the $200,000 for the operation of the homeless shelter. So that's I've bored you with the accounting. Let me talk just about a few more things. I have just a few more slides. Let's talk about why we acquired this property. Now, we started our conversations with council about the acquisition of a site originally simply for the emergency weather shelter. We did not start the process of thinking we were going to be buying an emergency homeless shelter. That came into play when the governor made the declaration and the state allocated funding that trickled down to us for that $1.158 $1 million that we're using. Let me see if I'm on the right page. I took ahead, haven't I? I'm sorry. Okay. There are several things that we have to understand in declaring shelters. Remember, we started, I told you, with the emergency weather shelter. There are several things that trip us into it. We have cooling stations that we authorize. We have, during peak times of the day, we might have a cooling and warming shelters. When we just do locations, those are usually like the public library or in a public building. When we actually authorize a shelter, we would actually open the building up if we have extreme heat or extreme cold during the daytime or in the evening. Those are usually just during peak times. We also have overnight shelters, and then the emergency shelter, which will actually be the planning for it is 24/7 during the period that we are operating it. The thresholds that trigger an emergency weather shelter are 32 degrees or below during the winter, 95 degrees or above in the summer, and then if there's smoke, if the health index is 150, which is considered unhealthy for everyone. Now I go to this slide. I'll turn my page quickly. There we go, behind. Linda, you're not waving now. Now, I want to talk about the location issues. Quite frankly, this was not an easy thing to solve, because if you look at how Ashland is laid out, it's sort of a longitudinal city, and it's primarily residential. So we were trying to find a location as best we could that had an existing building, that was predominantly or in a commercial area, that it was near transit, that it could accommodate the use. The facility itself was adequate to the use that we were looking for. And generally speaking, we were looking for something around 3,000 plus or minus square foot operation, because we not only think of this as an emergency weather shelter when we started, we also thought if there was a catastrophic event in Ashland, we needed a shelter in case other parts of the community became suddenly unhoused. Or if we had to distribute supplies, water and food to the community, we had to have a location that would work. So it had to be accessible by trucks, large trucks, to make deliveries and also do distributions. It also had to be on city utilities, and it had to be within a reasonable distance from retail operations. If it's going to be an emergency shelter, those individuals would still need to get to grocery stores or pharmacies for medications and so forth. So the criteria to solve this really limited our options because of the way our city is laid out, and also because we are actually a city that has a low count of commercial properties compared to residential. And we also have a great deal of public property. So it's difficult to find a location for a new city facility here. As we also, now after we realized that we had additional funding that we could utilize to acquire the emergency weather shelter, we also had to accommodate its use for an emergency homeless shelter. So we had some additional items. Again, this is what really triggered the existing structure conversation. And we also had to think that size, I mentioned 3,000 plus or minus square foot, that size became more important if we could upsize it, because we have to accommodate overnight sleeping. So this is the location that we have. You can see that it's directly adjacent to Ashland Street and directly adjacent to the rail line. You can also see its proximity in this map to the highway. And you also, I want to point out that you can see it's readily apparent its location on the edge of a commercial area by the level of density of development that you see along Ashland Street. This is the site in close-up. One of the things that's attractive about this property is, and I'll show it to you in the next slide, is that it is not generally that visible from the roadways. Also, it has some additional land in case we have other emergency activities. Remember, I was talking about making deliveries and distributions of materials. The more flexible, the more land we have, the more flexible the use of this location. So here are the pictures from the roadways. The top two are from just as you're starting up the overpass over the rail station. The building is on the left. This is a little farther up. The next picture to the right is a little farther up on the overpass. And then the bottom is from Clay Street. Now let me talk about what the shelter is not and what it is. It is not a drop-in center. It is not a case where you come and go as you please. The center will be operated where where applicants will be applications by individuals will be made to have occupancy in the building during the term that we are under the governor's emergency operations. So it's 2 months and 10 days. It is not a campground. And it is also not a nightly sleeping lawn. That is over behind the council chambers. Now what it is a state-funded operation of at least 30 beds. That's our obligation under the grant. It requires an application and screening process. We will be screening individuals for past court cases. In this case, we're not looking for local citations, whether we're looking for perhaps violent behavior that is documented in a court case. Also, we'll be checking the sex offender registry. The operation will be by an experienced shelter operator with on-site staff. It will be supervised during all operating hours, and it will have behavioral standards for occupants, and if you cannot live within the regulations or rules of the facility, you will be expelled.
The night lawn.
That's a good question. We'll deal with that question at the table. It also will have navigation support. The goal here is to help folks transition to permanent housing.
What happens after January 10th?
Okay, we'll get to that at the table. We're going to talk about that because we have some experts who can talk about that. And it will have some limited food service, probably one meal a day, probably a morning wake-up snack and a noon snack. The shelter will have fencing and site plannings to screen it from the neighborhoods. It will have an access gate and curfew hours. It will have interior and exterior security cameras. It will have security lighting and a smoking area to make sure that we can control any potential fire hazard. It'll have, and also will have adequate toilet and sanitary stations in the building or immediately adjacent to the building. It will also, APD will be expanding and adjusting its patrol service by extending the service that the officers are currently assigned to the downtown to also cover the Ashland Street and Clay Street area and the park area. We're also looking at expanding our cadet program so we can provide more park coverage. And we're also looking at the idea of opening a police storefront in the Exit 14 area. Some of the things that we've also done, if I get this to switch, there it is. We've also done a tour recently of Siskiyou School and identified some security issues that they have that the city is going to help them with. We'll also have, the park department has daily access or visitation to Clay Park, and they'll be continuing that along with working with APD to make sure that if there are any problems at the park that the police are able to respond to those needs. And the last couple of slides I want to go over very quickly are, this is the history of this project. We actually started it way back to thinking of the emergency shelter in 2022. On the first slide, I think next to the bottom slide, when we talk about February 7th and May 2nd, that's when we started our executive sessions to discuss with council the acquisition of a property for emergency weather shelter. This was 2 of 4 of the executive sessions that we held. On this slide, June 6th is when the council accepted the all-in grant from the state so we could fund the acquisition of an emergency homeless shelter. August 20th, we did the walk at the Siskiyou School. September 11th, the council did a walk of the neighborhoods. I spent 4 hours out there myself so we could go door to door and make sure everyone in the neighborhoods at least got a flyer or a contact. And it was a very enlightening conversation that I had in my walk. On the 12th, we completed the acquisition. The building is acquired. It is being leased back to the seller until tomorrow. Tomorrow's the last day for them to move out. They will also maintain a couple closets and some other operations within the building while we start the process of modifying the building for our use. A couple of things I want to point out that are coming up. I'm going to go to actually this is my next step slide. The property, again, move out is tomorrow. On October 7th, the council will have a study session where there will be presentations and updates on what is happening with the shelter, and it will also provide the community an opportunity to have a general public forum with the council to discuss ongoing issues with the shelter. In mid-October, we are planning an open house before we actually start opening the building up or starting to do tests or soft starts in the building so that the community can walk through and see what the facility looks like. January 10th, the emergency shelter begins to transition to the emergency weather shelter, and after that, until we anticipate that will operate until March 30th. If you have questions, you can go to the city's website and submit questions and see the questions and answers that for those that we received. There are also cards at your table. If you have any questions you'd like us to submit and consider, please fill out a card and leave it with someone at the table. And that completes my presentation.
Thank you, Joe. One of the questions that has come up from a lot of people is what happens in the long term, and the answer is we don't know yet. We will have this facility, and we're going to learn a lot in this next couple of months, and we're going to find out more from the state about what is available from them, and take all of that together with what the community is looking for to decide what this looks like long term. Now it's time for us to go ahead and move on to the tables. But just before we do, I would like Cassie Clare to come up just for a moment. I've asked her, as the Executive Director of ORA, to just give us a couple of high notes about the facility that is already in the neighborhood. As we've gone around and talked to folks, we've understood that there are some misconceptions about what happens there. So she's just going to give us a very brief overview of ORA, and then we are going to come back and I'll send you off to the tables.
Thank you, Mayor Graham, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm Cass Sinclair. I'm the Executive Director of ORA, or Opportunities for Housing, Resources, and Assistance. I wanted to talk to you about what we do at ORA. So we occupy the old Super 8 in Ashland. We have 3 primary programs. Our first program is a walk-in resource center. We serve about 40 to 50 people per day at ORA, those folks that are housed and unhoused. We have 10 navigation staff. You might consider them like caseworkers. Those are the folks that come alongside the people we serve and help them remove barriers. When folks come into ORA, they may be looking for a driver's license, a birth certificate, housing, jobs, you name it. You never know what somebody's going to need when they walk through our door. We also, at the Resource Center, we do serve as a primary mail home for folks experiencing homelessness. And we also partner with other organizations in the Valley. So if we don't provide the services at ORA, we have referrals to the other 55, 60 folks and organizations that are serving our community. We finished renovations. We now have a 52-room low barrier shelter. That means we're serving the highest needs individuals in our community, and they stay for 6 months at a time, and while they're there, we're helping them get permanently housed. We also have a laundry shower trailer and a partnership with Laundry Love, who helps us provide laundry service to the unhoused folks we serve. And we partner with OHSU School of Nursing, who provides foot clinic and telemedicine, and we work with La Clinica. Inside the ORA Center, we are a social service hub, and we have a federally qualified health center. So we partner with La Clinica, and they provide mental and medical health services to folks in the Resource Center and folks coming in, folks that are in the shelter. And then we also have a community partner room, and that's a place where our community partners can come and serve the people that we serve. And so all of this is happening inside the ORA Center. I do want to call out that at the shelter, again, folks have 6 months, and we have 24/7, 365 shelter staff, and we pay very close attention to what's happening in the shelter. Some quick numbers, and then I'll cut it short, is that since April 1st, when we opened our doors, we have helped 402 individuals get permanently housed, and we have helped 487 community members in our community from eviction, and that's the work we're doing at ORA. Our part in the emergency order part will be a service provider for the shelter, the new shelter, and we are also working under the emergency order to get 37 unhoused community members into permanent housing and all that that entails. And we're helping 96 households from eviction.
So now what we want to do is move to the tables. We have several of our city staffers have taken their evening aside to join us tonight. So I will introduce them and let you know what's happening at each of the tables. Over here we have the Ashland Police Department information. Chief Ty O'Meara is at the table there, and also our City Attorney Doug McGarry. And that corner back one there is the facility information, and what you're going to be asking questions about or making comments there is about the physical plant of the building. So if you have questions about the exterior, the use of the land, the use of the shelter, that sort of thing, that's what you'll look at there. And the folks that we have sitting that table are Mike Morrison and also Dana Smith. And so then this table here is the shelter information. This is where you would ask questions about the services that are being offered, what that application process might look like, anything around that. And Cass Sinclair is there along with Joe Lassard, our city manager, and Linda Reed, our housing specialist. And then this table is the neighborhood information, and this is where you would talk to us about what you're already seeing in the neighborhood, the goals that you have for your neighborhood, some of the challenges that you would like to see fixed as part of this process and that you think we need to know about in order to make this project successful. We have Brandon Golden, who runs our community development program. We have Chief Ty O'Meara. Oh, I'm sorry. Ty is over there. I have chiefs on both sides. Chief Ralph Sartain is here. And then Sydney is our wildfire compliance officer. So I know we know wildfire is a top issue. We also have Councilor Bloom here. I believe Councilor Kaplan will be here as well. And Leslie Eldridge, who is the interim Parks Commission chair, or Parks Department director. Okay, there's a lot of people. So thank you all for coming. What we will do is we'll let everybody distribute where you want to go to ask your questions. These flip charts are also there if you want to write a comment or you have an idea and you don't feel like you can get it into the conversation, feel free to write it. And then I will chime this every 20 minutes or so, and that's a great time to get up and move to another table if you have multiple issues you want to address. So this sound tells you that if you want to move on to another table, it's time to go. Okay, with that, we will just turn everyone loose to the tables.
Oh, you are, okay.
In the proposal.
So it'll be used for homeless services in some capacity.
That's right, for 10 years.
Correct.
But my key question was the process that in a democracy, when you're developing property, it should be citywide citizens that help decide that. And no matter whether you had to sign this late in the game, you could have notified us. And we could have had a meeting in 1 or 2 days after you signed. You had to at least give 6 days notice before the vote on August 15th, right? To put it on the agenda? At least 6. How many? Okay. So I'd like to know, when was the contract signed before the August 15th decision, and why was that? So we've already put it in. Now it's done. There's nothing we can do to change it. You have decided that without us. And I'm sorry, I believe in housing the homeless, but in a democracy, you allow the people to participate in a decision like this. You know, if you're going to affect property values, and I'm okay if that happens, but I want to at least be a part of the decision and have input. You didn't allow any of that here, not one bit.
It did not go the way we wanted it to go. I will just tell you that. It was a complete fall down. But it was not a fall down that was intentional, and it wasn't one that was planned. What ended up happening is that we had these conversations. As Joe mentioned, there were very few sites that could work at all. And this is the only one that really functioned. So we had, behind Albertsons doesn't have a building. We couldn't buy it. It's in the county. The space behind Albertsons does not have a building. We could not use this grant for that. No, the grant wouldn't allow it. So we were in a situation that we did not want to be in, which was that we had a very, very tight timeline within which we had to deal with this. And the negotiations went back and forth and back and forth. It was not a simple kind of conversation, and it chewed up the time that the council had intended to be able to go out to the community. When you see that we noticed it, I think it came out Thursday evening for that following Tuesday, we were still waiting for the seller to get back to us. We put it on there preemptively because that's how close to the timeline we were. If we miss the deadlines in the grant, we have to give the money back, and then we don't have this facility. And so I understand that frustration. I absolutely, completely understand it. I live on the other side of Clay Street Park. I got my own letter in the mail. And I know that we are dealing with problems, and I know that they are, that we're all dealing with them in this neighborhood. And I understand that frustration, and it's completely justified. Absolutely. What we are trying to do right now is make sure that the way it started is not the way it carries on. That's why we jumped out. All of the counselors went out knocking on doors to talk to people to make sure they knew about this. But this is not the only conversation we are going to have, not by a long shot. We are going to see how this works for a couple of months. There isn't, you're right, it's a fait accompli. It's bought. It's bought.
I appreciate your honesty. It's done.
It's bought.
Right. For 10 years.
Well, but what we put in it is not a fait accompli, right? And that's the part where we want. The piece that didn't happen in the purchasing of the building is the piece that we are working to make sure happens in the operation of the facility. And what we've been doing in our walks around the neighborhood are finding out what are those other challenges that are in this neighborhood that we can put up alongside our goals for providing these services so that we can put things in place that are addressing those issues so that people feel better about their neighborhood. These chronic problems that we have under the overpass, along the bike path, in the park, you know, those are real issues, and the goal is that now that we've got a facility and a piece of land, we have something, excuse me ma'am, if you can hold on just a moment. If we can figure out what to do as a neighborhood that works in terms of that long-term 10-year requirement, right, that helps us deal with some of those chronic problems we have, that's what we were going for. And that was the reason why it was still better to buy the property and to get something to work with than to let that money go by and still have the chronic problems we have in the neighborhood. So, totally understand. Ma'am, sounds like she's back.
And I think the site is a perfect site for what you're trying to do. I would hope that there could be some bathrooms, some porta potties, and some garbage cans set up and maintained in that area. I think in the last 2 years, as there's been more people moved to that area to use various facilities, and the shelter was closed down at the other end of town, there is a lot more garbage and there is a lot more debris. And I think to keep all of us just feeling like it's our community, You know, when we have a big music festival, we clean up the garbage and we put out porta potties. We have many reasons to support the people who are in that shelter, and I would hope we would give them those facilities so we don't
have the staff for it. Everything gets prioritized when it comes in, and either Doug's office or the district attorney's office have the ability and the willpower to prosecute the cases. Yes. Yes. That is an unoccupied campsite that hasn't been there there hasn't been anybody.
What's the question?
In this corner of the property, there's been a campsite set up there. Nobody's been there for months.
I saw somebody there.
The meeting tonight for anyone who is interested. What you need to know is that I will assign myself as the liaison to this group. And so as we go through the process of identifying other ideas for this property, what it might look like going forward, as things happen in the neighborhood, after this is operational that you need the council and the city to know about, you will have a direct line to the mayor's office. So please, if you're interested in being part of that, just make sure you sign up. It says neighborhood committee sign up in the back. Make sure you do that before you head out. And I'm not going to ding the bell because I think, well, now would be a good time if anybody wants to switch spaces. But we have quite a conversation still going on over here. So please move about as you would like to participate in different table conversations. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
And we're going to attract that in. Ashland's going to get out of the way. It already is. And again, the homeless thing, we've been in balance with the homeless here for ages. And you need to attract a hub. If you look at Portland. Also, I would encourage everyone to listen to the police scanners in Medford. Listen to what's going on Bear Creek. There's a fire almost every week. That's going to be here. We're attract that here. That'll be here. We have less money, less services, less going on. There's going to be more problems.
Yeah, is this just 30 less homeless people in Portland, so their numbers could go down?
No, one of the things to keep in mind is that the state is investing in communities across the state that have had at least a 50% increase in that 2017 to 2022. A lot of them are along the interstate, right? We've had the travelers have come through, as you were mentioning, they've always come up and down the interstate. They just didn't come in these numbers. You mentioned Measure 110. It's a big problem.
Yes, ma'am.
And we are actually, I was just meeting with Commissioner Dotterer today. A lot of the communities around the valley are passing resolutions calling on the legislature to make some changes in it. So that's part of that perfect storm that we've been through. But it's here.
Thank you all for coming this evening. The university does have a hard stop for us at 8 o'clock. So as we disband and folks head home, again, remember that there's a volunteer table there if you are interested in being part of the neighborhood advisory group. Again, thank you so much for coming out, and we will stay in touch.